Hi, my name is Justin Lanier from the University of Chicago. This is a talk for the Nearly Carbon Neutral Geometric Topology Conference 2021 for the special session Beyond the Chalkboard, Topology Through Outreach. The title of my talk is The End of Research. It's a exciting title in the sense that it's like, well, what could you possibly mean by that? But really it's about two questions about what our goals for outreach are, for math outreach, and also what it would be like to try to imagine a world where outreach wasn't necessary. So thanks to the organizers of the whole conference for putting it together, and also those who organized this affinity group on outreach. Also, at the down in the description below, there'll be a link to lots of online resources related to the topics and organizations and events that I'll be mentioning. All right, so a couple of caveats before I dive in. What I'm going to be describing to you is a very partial picture of math outreach. It's definitely from my own perspective and my own experiences. It's not meant to be comprehensive. It's very scattered and impressionistic. I just cobbled together a bunch of my own thoughts. And I hope that they'll be useful in prompting conversation and reflection and sort of having big ideas about what is possible in terms of doing math outreach, both to the world at large and also doing outreach sort of within research mathematics. And the final thing, I'll be lauding and talking up a lot of outreach efforts, and so I hope it goes without saying that I really love outreach efforts, even though at some points I will point to some ways in which they fall short of what we would hope for eventually. Right, so when we talk about the end of outreach, and using a play on words for end, one senses what is the goal of math outreach? What kinds of outcomes would we hope for or aim for or expect based on these kinds of activities? And then also, a lot of outreach efforts that are like pretty short range sort of thoughts. Like we're just trying to help people up a little bit from where they are to maybe where they're going, maybe without having the opportunity or really the spaces to reflect on what this whole endeavor is all about and what we could shoot for in terms of a math community 20 or 50 years in the future, right? Whenever sort of our most junior mathematicians are becoming professors emeriti, what could the math world and community look like? So the talk is in two parts. This first 25 minutes is going to be a reflection on sort of my personal encounters with math outreach, both past in my life growing up and coming into the profession, and also in the present, the kinds of math outreach that I'm engaged in with currently. We'll start by talking about sort of framing in a big picture philosophical way what is math outreach, and then I'll describe some about my experiences as an outreachee, some ways in which math outreach has been done on my behalf, and then also some experiences that I've had as an outreacher in extending a hand to others. And then the second part of the talk, I'll discuss, I'll sort of project into the future some of my own efforts, and also just some speculations and some vain or vague hopes. I hope they're not vain, and I hope they're not too vague. But sort of in the same way in math, we have open problems to sort of suggest the way in which we might work toward in the future. I think having open problems or conjectures or things to shoot for in math outreach is a good idea also. And again, this is all just to say, this is a limited perspective. There are lots and lots of people who do math outreach. There are all kinds of different efforts, and it's a long history, and I don't by any means mean to slight anyone by leaving anything out or calling something a problem whenever people have been making progress on it for a long time. Okay, with those further caveats said, always start with examples before definitions. So what comes to mind for me whenever I think of math outreach, a lot of it has to do with events, either sort of one day or multi-day or over the course of a year or semester of sort of math events, usually for K-12 students, where they get to engage with math outside of a classroom setting, usually with math that is different from the math that they encounter in their K-12 classroom, either more advanced or just different from school subjects, often in a way that is sort of low pressure or low stakes, that's meant to help students to engage with math in new ways, to build up their math identities, and to foster a love of math sort of over and above what they might get in their classroom settings. So this sets up a little bit of a dichotomy or a tension between the notion of outreach and the notion of education, as well as a bunch of other notions that I've stuck down at the bottom. All right, so there's a broad sense in which outreach and education or teaching are just the same thing, right? Like there's a big old world out there, and there are people who are new to it, who either young or old, who haven't had certain experiences before, and then there are people who have had those experiences and want to share them, and then you create experiences to help them along into richer new experiences. Things fall into the rubric of education if they're sort of been designed by our culture for everyone. Everyone sort of has an opportunity to take a Algebra 1 class or a geometry class or a class about fractions. That's a part of their usual K-12 education. But on the other hand, outreach involves some people saying, hey, there's some kind of math experience that are caring about math that is different from or over and above the math experiences that everyone has, so that one encounters in school. And those experiences tend to be opt-in, and you have to sort of, you or your parents have to find that new experience. It's not sort of the default. And like I said, it often involves enrichment or a particular focus on how people experience or identify with math. In general, outreach, not just for math, but in general, if I were going to try to give a definition, it's about helping people to find and connect to a community, right? So there can be outreach efforts for any kind of community where you're trying to bring people into it. And this is a little strange in math because everyone does math coming up in school. They get years and years of encounters with math. And so there ends up being a little bit of a tension between like, well, how can you do outreach to people who day in and day out have encounters with math? Like it would be a little counterintuitive to like, we're gonna do baking outreach or football outreach to people who are already doing that activity on a daily basis. And so this definitely brings to bear the sort of notion of what it means to be inside or outside of math and what exactly we mean by that. There are lots of other dichotomies down below. Like outreach isn't exactly the same thing as popularization, where someone puts together a piece of media, whether a video or a book, and then puts it out into the world, and maybe someone latches onto it. Like there's a sense in which that's outreach, but it's not, there's not a community behind it, and it's not so clear what the next steps are. So popularization is certainly something that can help bring someone into math, but it's not the same kind of community building that I have in mind in this talk. Similarly, advertisement, like just being like, hey, math is great, is not the same thing as helping people to take steps deeper into their relationship with mathematics. Connected to outreach, which tends to see like a world that's out there that needs help. There are also these notions of community building, which happen sort of inside of this community that might also be doing outreach. There isn't so much language around community building in research mathematics. We use the word service sometimes in the context of research, teaching, and service, but sort of the notion of doing sort of the human care work that builds community is seen as maybe a little different from outreach. And the same is true for what I'll call justice work that involves not just building community for the people who are already there, but are making sure that the folks who have been left outside for a variety of reasons, including racism and sexism and all kinds of societal structures and evils, that making sure that our communities just aren't well-functioning units on a little island, but are actively bringing people in to be a part of and like co-creating community together. And the last thing I wanted to mention on this slide is that outreach often falls upon the work of individuals and sort of what their efforts are. And something that I'm particularly attuned to or want to push on is that we ought to be interested in sort of what systems and infrastructure we can build that sort of grant access to lots of people over and above, depending on what individuals are able or are willing to sort of share and leverage from their own energy and capacity. Great. Oh yeah, so this is just a little graphic of so whenever we think about outreach, one kind of thing that we could hope for is to help people take steps sort of closer and closer into a community, or to develop a deeper and deeper relationship with mathematics themselves. So that's not a simple inside or outside. We want to help people to make progress towards something that is enriching for them. And then another thing that I wanted to share is this meme where sometimes it can feel like it's the case that outreach efforts, right? You have someone who doesn't yet have the mathematical experiences that would be great for them to have. And then what outreach does is it doesn't actually give them a way to go further and further into concentric circles, but instead it's just like, high five, great, we did something, we had a math party for a day, and then there isn't really a way of following up. And this is not a criticism for one day events. It's just that inside of the whole ecosystem, you want there to be additional structures and infrastructure that help people who have had a good first day experience or a good one-off experience to take further steps. So if you've had a good experience at a math festival, maybe there's a math circle you can join, kind of thing. So here are a couple of tendencies in outreach. These are certainly not cut and dried facts, but just sort of general observations, again, not backed up by research, but just from my own experience, that outreach efforts tend to be sort of short-term. Short-term might be a day, or it might be a couple of weeks or a semester, but they're often offered to people who are outside of math, so to speak, without clear next steps. Like if what's occurring to me at the moment is, right, like Amazon recommendations, right? You read a book. It doesn't have to be an Amazon recommendation. It can be a librarian instead, right? But just there's a way of moving on to the next things that you can continue to build, rather than just sort of a one-off thing. Outreach tends to focus on young people, people who are in school, kindergarten through 12th grade. As a specialist focus on middle schoolers, sort of before they hit high school math, and at a time when I mean, it's very understandable, and it makes a lot of sense when people are really starting to form what their identities are, right? Whether you can really start forming a math identity in middle school as you try to sort out who you are and who your peers are and what you think of yourself. Like I mentioned before, outreach has sort of a complicated relationship with school math. Sometimes folks who do outreach, they want to say things like, yeah, we're going to show you what real math is, that sort of denigrates the math that happens in school. And oftentimes unfairly, there's so much good work being done in K-12 classrooms to help young people build positive and productive relationships with math. And then this last one, that outreach efforts are often run by people outside of math academia. And if they're run inside academia, then often they are spearheaded by very junior folks, graduate students, or non-tenure track faculty, or maybe a single tenure track faculty member who's sort of spearheading it, but without maybe the support of his or her colleagues. And part of the reason for this is that outreach has historically not really been a part of the workload of research mathematicians. It's something that many people do out of passion, that people want to turn around and help up the people. We somehow found our way into mathematics, and we want to help other people to have those positive experiences as well, or to remedy the negative experiences that we had, so that other people don't have to have those. But there's sort of a gap here. Like, plenty of outreach work happens, including among mathematicians, but in sort of ad hoc ways, often, and not in ways that are always supported by our institutions. And I'll talk a little bit more about math academia's role in math outreach in part 2. Okay, so just a couple of more images about my own experience of outreach. What does it feel like to reach out, or to be reached out to? So growing up, one of my experiences of being reached out to is my parents described me to several magazines, including a science magazine called Discover. In addition to taking me to the library and giving me access to books and magazines in that way, for which I'm forever grateful. There's a way in which the mailbox stood for me as like a passage, or like words from beyond, right? Like, there's a whole big world out there, and you can connect to it through because some people did some work for you. And I had a related image whenever I started teaching. The way I would think about the work that I was doing was, right, here are my students, and then here is this math. And my job was like, there was some kind of curtain or barrier in between. It wasn't that the students needed me to do something to them, and the math didn't need anything to be done to it. It was just to find ways of helping to remove the barriers for them to be able to interact with mathematics, to help them to access it. And that my job was almost sort of a negative job of making sure that that those obstacles weren't in the way. And then finally, there's this Google search. I'll talk more about the Promise program later. But in this age of searching, it can be really difficult to always find the thing that would be the right fit for you, or the thing that would help you to grow, or that would enrich your life. Because search bars are not the same thing as like stumbling through a library and running across some cool thing. You have to know what to type in. So I don't remember what I typed in to eventually find this Promise for Teachers program, but it was a really crucial thing for me to realize, after typing in the right combination of search terms, hey, there are people out here who want to help me to grow in my own relationship with math, even though now I'm a teacher and no longer a student. So a couple of slides about me as an outreach and then a math outreacher. So these first 3 have to do with when I was in elementary, middle, and high school. So like I mentioned before, an important part of outreach for me were the books and magazines that I encountered growing up. I remember reading a book about Fermat's last theorem when I was in middle school or maybe high school, just like a popular account. And then there were this cool article in Discover magazine about ways of writing really, really, really big numbers. I participated in math contests, including Math Counts and Continental Math League, when I was in middle school and high school. And that was maybe my first experiences of doing math that weren't only classroom math. And then I almost forgot about this, but I did, it wasn't called STEM back then. This was in the early 90s. But I did some kind of engineering, math, science summer outreach program from my local university when I was in middle school, and had my first sort of encounter with algebra there. And then there's sort of an ellipsis. So a number of years went by. I graduated from high school. I went off to college, or I was not a math major, although I took a number of math classes. And I knew from my experiences growing up that I wanted to be a math teacher. So I started off in my math career, but it wasn't so clear how to continue to do math, or to learn more math, or to grow in that relationship. And so I was very lucky that over a number of years, I got to experience a number of events and programs that eventually led me to graduate school. So the Promise for Teachers program at Boston University is a summer intensive, both for high school students and also for math teachers, middle and high school math teachers, to learn about number theory. It's basically like a undergraduate course in number theory through discovery learning. The New York Math Circle, when I was teaching in New York, there was a New York Math Teacher Circle where I got to meet math teachers who were really interested in math and learning math and digging a little deeper, both for themselves and their students. So that was really impactful to me. Over one summer, I got to attend an REU, a research experience for undergraduates at the University of Arizona. It was an REU, but I asked the professor in charge, hey, could I come? Right? Like I'm a teacher, but I'm interested in this geometry work that y'all are doing. I don't need to be supported financially. My school can help me with that. And so as a teacher, I got to have this research experience, which is a pretty rare thing. I also had a research experience at Promise. So I'm a big advocate for providing opportunities for teachers to dig into either math enrichment or math research work. I also had, when I was in New York teaching, and then later in Princeton, this is not exactly outreach, but it was an opportunity. So I found these math research seminars at CUNY and at Princeton. And I just emailed the professors and were like, hey, can I come to your seminar? And they said, yeah, okay. Like there was it was not onerous. It was, it was an available opportunity, although not like designed for me or publicized to me. But it was very important in my coming to graduate school. And then I'll talk more about these math encounters at MoMath a little later on. A couple of small notes. But these math encounters are popularization, popular talks for large audiences about research math. Just a couple little nuggets. So I had this long career before coming to graduate school. And so I think of myself as I haven't had the experience of feeling like an imposter, but I do feel like an interloper sometimes, where the way I think about math and math culture and math outreach don't exactly match up with the ambient math culture. And I hope that that my own experiences can help maybe broaden the conversation around math outreach. And also just to note that with the internet and fragmentation of media, it can be really hard to help people to find opportunities just because everyone's often in the sort of their own bubble, and it's hard to get information out broadly to folks. So this is a challenge in doing outreach work more generally. And then me as an outreacher, there's a bunch of things that I did whenever I was a K-12 teacher. I wrote this Math Bunch blog for a number of years with Anna Weltman and Paul Solomon. I've been involved in lots of math circles and festivals and contests. This BEAM program, more folks should know about it in the math research world. It's Bridge to Entering Advanced Mathematics. It's a wonderful outreach program for underserved middle schoolers and high schoolers in LA and New York City. It's a summer program, but it's also so much more. Yeah, there's a lot of work that I did sort of on the internet, helping culture build and community build when I was a teacher, including this Explore MIT-BOS and this Math is Personal SMOOC. And then I will mention this 19th century math short course. So it was something that one of my schools did for parents, where they had these courses for parents that met like once a week for some number of weeks. And I taught this course to a handful of parents about 19th century mathematics. And it was just really wonderful. And it felt like a big success. We read some biographies of 19th century mathematicians and also learned some about their math, because this is math that, most of the math that we learn in school, or even, into calculus, is stuff that was known before the 19th century. And, folks know Dickens and they know Van Gogh, but are not so familiar with Cauchy or Riemann or Gauss and so forth. And so that was a cool thing. And then these last three are math outreach things that I've done since I've been in grad school, which I'll talk about each of them just briefly. This thing off to the right, though, is that I drew these concentric circles before, and you might think that grad school, you would have gotten to the center by the time that you managed to get to the middle, being grad school. But the whole thing is sort of fractally, right? You're like all the way on the outside again when you arrive in grad school. And so doing outreach sort of within the math research community is also really important. So I'll mention a couple of those things next. So Mod Squad was an attempt that I made in building community for grad students in my own research area of mapping class groups. Mod is an abbreviation that's used for mapping class groups, and so it's a little play on words for this old TV show. And it's just a regular drop-in online meetup to discuss research papers. So we wouldn't see each other often at in-person conferences, but on a regular basis, we could see each other and learn some new math together and build up a shared collection of research that we'd experienced and just have a sense of community. And Santana Apton runs it now. I think it'd be great if there were more such ways for people within a research community at a junior level to interact with each other, and also as a way of helping new graduate students come into a research area. With Marissa Loving, I run this program called SUBgroups, which helps to build community for first-year math graduate students. The structure is just that they're regular online small group chats to discuss the start of grad school. So people share successes and struggles, and they uplift each other, and they bridge into new math experiences. This is for many folks, graduate school, the beginning of it is really tough, and there's not really anyone to talk to about it necessarily, because you can be sort of wary of talking about your weaknesses or your worries with your own cohort, because you're trying to put on a strong face. And it's hard to explain things to your friends and family from before grad school because they haven't had a grad school experience. But by sort of putting together small groups of folks who have similar affinities or identities, we can help them to bridge into this new experience for themselves. We've done this for a couple of years now. Last fall, we had about 250 participants. We also, Marissa and I wrote this article called Building Equity-Minded Online Programs, using subgroups as an example. And then finally, this project that Matt Ando and Marissa and Bianca Varai did this past year with the AMS and with MC. So this is a larger scale endeavor to help build a community of practice for graduate education in mathematics, the mathematical sciences more generally. So it's outreach in the sense that math graduate program leaders, say in particular graduate directors, they're often sort of on their own and without a lot of resources and in terms of how to lead a graduate program. And so we wanted to help create and foster a community, like build the infrastructure so that those people could talk to each other and learn from each other, and find good or emerging practices to help make graduate life and graduate programs more equitable and more pleasant and productive experiences for graduate students. So the whole thing involves having these working groups that are regular online small group chats for grad program leaders, and then we also connect grad program leaders with expertise through a series of workshops. And then finally, there are these conferences where they're sort of big tent events helping to support and hold accountable this work that's being done by grad program leaders, and to show that it's valued and needed. Okay, so that's an overview, and that'll be the end of part one.